All right, congratulations on making it to the final weeks of the semester. We're at the final module, and this module is going to be concerned with learning objective number 3, which is to examine a research method within a communication subfield. And I've decided that in this module, we're going to closely examine one set of methods called rhetorical criticism that comes out of the subfield of public communication or rhetoric. But before we get into examining rhetorical criticism more closely, I want to start by looking at what we mean by communication methods and research methodology. These are terms that you might hear. And so in this video, I'm going to define these terms. I'm going to show you a basic communication method, and I'm going to show you a few communication research methods that are used in the discipline. So let's get started with that. Before we do, though, I want you to look at the image on the screen here, which is of communication journals. These are National Communication Association journals. And academic journals are just one of the ways in which we share our research. And these in particular are what are called peer review journals. They're peer reviewed, meaning that other communication scholars are reading it, criticizing it, and ultimately deciding what goes into these journals. In addition to journals, scholars will publish books. They will give lectures or talks. They'll create videos. Sometimes they'll create different aesthetic products. So research gets shared in a lot of different ways. But before it's shared, the researcher has to conduct the research. They actually have to go about kind of creating and analyzing their particular thing of study. And so methods then are how researchers go about doing that. So a research method, you see a picture here of a person putting together a piece of furniture. It's in terms of a research method, then I want you to think about it in terms of it's how the study's actually carried out or built. It's what tools are going to be used and how they're going to be used to do the study. That's essentially what a researcher does in the conduct of a given study. So that's the method. What is the researcher actually doing? And this is sometimes opposed to or distinguished from the research methodology. Sometimes people will be sloppy with these terms and they'll use them interchangeably. So I just wanted to spend a moment to try to clarify this. Don't obsess about these differences, but essentially when we're talking about methodology, we're talking about the rationale behind why we want to choose certain methods to do our studies. And so research methodology is the rationale behind the process used to study something. Why are we going about it this way? These are generally methods that are drawn from tradition, right? Other researchers have used these methods and they've had success with them. And so along with these practices and traditions comes some explanations for why these practices, these methods, these processes are useful to conduct the study. So anytime we are kind of studying research methods or discussing research methods, we are doing methodology. Okay, it gets confusing. So I just want you to think of the method is what the researcher actually does for that particular study. And methodology is, how researchers who have used similar methods have gone about it historically and why they've done it that way historically. So it's more of a discussion of the methods. A more important distinction that I want you to know is between quantitative and qualitative methods, because you're going to hear that perhaps you already have in your studies. Generally speaking, think of the word quantity. You're going to deal with quantitative data, data that is measurable, data that you can count and kind of statistically analyze. Qualitative methods, on the other hand, deals with the qualities of something, trying to interpret and understand something, not by counting it, but by looking at its characteristics, at its qualities, for lack of a better word. Over here at this graphic you see here, we can get a better understanding. Qualitative research conceptually is concerned with understanding human behavior from the informant's perspective, and it's going to assume a dynamic and negotiated reality, right? We're trying to understand what the kind of subjective meanings of certain behaviors and certain communication are. And so when we mean it's a dynamic reality, we mean that meaning is kind of negotiated and interpreted. And methodologically, if we're doing qualitative research, we're going to be collecting our data by kind of interacting with participant observers, other people, observing people as they communicate, as they interact, analyzing messages for their themes, the meanings of those messages, and generally we're going to be concerned with the language of the people that we're studying. How do they understand what is happening? So qualitative research is going to be quite different than quantitative research, which is more concerned with discovering kind of the truth, facts about social phenomenon, a fixed and measurable reality. Generally, we're trying to, count the existence of something, measure it, or we're trying to demonstrate a kind of causal relationship, cause effect. I do this, this happens, and we're trying to assert a kind of observable, measurable interaction. And so data in this is going to be through kind of scientific experimentation, measuring, numerical comparison, statistical analysis, those types of things. So two different kinds of research. Quantitative is going to be more scientific, as I have here, using the scientific method. And qualitative is going to be more interpretive, using humanistic methods. Here's a basic method of research. If we were to break kind of all research down, whether it's quantitative or qualitative, down into its basic steps, what would those basic steps be? This might look familiar to you. Generally, research starts with a question. We formulate a question. We look at the existing communication research and we try to see what hasn't been answered yet, or what areas can I explore, and we try to formulate that into a question that guides our research. What are we looking to answer? And from there, we need to decide on a research methodology that we want to use. Given our question, what's an appropriate way that we can go about answering that question? And of course, I'm going to draw from the tradition of other researchers and what they've done to study similar things. Or in rare occasions, we might invent our own methodology. The third step then, once we've chosen our methodology, is to design the study itself. What's your strategy or method going to be? What are you going to actually look at, and how are you going to look at it, and what are you going to do when you're looking at it? So we're designing the study in the third step. The fourth step then would be to carry out the study, to begin the gathering of the data, the analysis of the data based on your method, and then ultimately the fifth step, the interpretation. What are your findings? What are your summaries? What are your conclusions that have come from your research? And then lastly, the final step would be to share the results with your peers, with other people. This allows them to either, in the case of quantitative research, to try to replicate the study, to verify it scientifically. If it's quantifiable, we ought to be able to replicate it. Or in the case of qualitative research, we might share the results in order to be in dialogue, to offer multiple interpretations of something, to try to persuade others to see this phenomenon from our interpretation. And when we share results, of course, we also get feedback, we get criticism. Sometimes our work creates other work. Other researchers try to do what we did or do something different or prove us wrong. So that would be the kind of final step, would be bringing it to the community of scholars. So some particular research methods that are used, and this is just a short sample. I think I'm going to show you 4 of them. There's many of these, but these are 4 big ones, and they'll give you an idea of what communication researchers do to fill the pages of these journals here. And the first one, rhetorical criticism, we're going to talk about in the upcoming module items. So I'm just going to mention it here and say you're going to learn a lot about it. It deals with the art of persuasion. What makes a message persuasive? Rhetorical criticism is going to kind of break down and explain why something is persuasive in the way that it is. So that's rhetorical criticism. Ethnographic research comes to us from anthropology, sociology sometimes uses this, and communication researchers use this as well. Ethnographic research would involve, going into a particular culture or space, participating and observing with that culture, and trying to interpret and understand what are the kind of norms of behavior, what is the shared reality, what's going on in this space, and how can we try to understand it from the point of view of somebody who is a part of that culture. So ethnographic research and rhetorical criticism are both interpretive. They're both qualitative approaches to studying communication. A third communication method, it would be survey research. You conduct a survey, you create a survey, and you get a sample of people to answer that survey. Hopefully that sample that you get is representative of whatever population you're trying to study, and you're going to quantify, statistically kind of measure certain attitudes perhaps within that community or that population. You want to see what's the frequency of certain behaviors in that community. So we could use survey research, for example, to find out whether or not students prefer to turn in their work using videos or papers, documents. And we might ask students which is the preferred way you like to communicate your learning. And then we could measure that. And as my description suggests, this is a typically quantitative approach to studying communication, although some surveys can be designed to collect qualitative data as well. Experimental research, this is the scientific method where you are trying to create kind of laboratory conditions in order to establish a cause and effect relationship. When I do this, this happens. So it's going to use the scientific method. It's going to use things like variables and controls in order to try to replicate a certain interaction over and over and over again until we can say that this is a law of communication, right? So we might, for example, create a laboratory situation where we have one speaker speaking to an audience where they make eye contact, and we have that same speaker speaking to a similar audience and they don't make eye contact. And then we might see, did the first audience like the speaker more than the second audience? And perhaps is eye contact the reason for the difference between the two? So you're conducting a scientific experiment in order to try to establish some sort of cause and effect relationship. So those are four major communication research methods. In the upcoming videos and in the upcoming reading, we're going to focus even further on rhetorical criticism, and we're going to talk about particular types of rhetorical criticism that are used as methods in the discipline. Thank you.